All right, welcome back. Our next talk is with Scott Weston, who will be talking about GCPwn, a pentesting tool for GCP. And this talk is sponsored by Altered Security, who is also sponsoring our food trucks for lunch right after this session. Altered Security pioneered affordable red team labs and have trained more than 30,000 plus InfoSec professionals from more than 130 plus countries across the globe. Their hands-on certifications are industry recognized and are very popular with professionals and organizations to demonstrate skills. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, there we go. Sounds like everyone can hear me. My name is Scott. My handle is Web and Root. I'm going to be giving a talk about a tool I've been making in Python over the past 6 or 7 months to help pen test GCP, if it was not clear from my super creative title. Quick about myself, I'm a senior security consultant at a company called NetSpy. They're based out of Minneapolis with remote workers all over the US. They do things like web applications, mobile, cloud, which includes AWS, Azure, and GCP, which is what I'll be giving my talk on. I listed some experiences I have on the slide in terms of technologies. I've been listed on some bug bounties. Last year, I spoke at CloudSec about pivoting in AWS organizations. So this year, I'm going in a completely new direction and doing GCP. The story is over the last 6 or 7 months, I really wanted to learn GCP. So I thought the best way to do that was to make a tool that emulated a lot of the things that Pacu does for AWS, which is made by Rhino Security. So I made a tool in Python over the last 6 or 7 months, and I released that code last week as open source and free. I know everyone's two favorite phrases, open source and free. So you can find it on NetSpy on GitHub. It's just called GCPwn. Some quick highlights for it. It supports ADC and service credentials, so application default credentials, and standalone OAuth 2 tokens. It allows you to swap creds. It allows you to store creds. It allows you to enumerate data. From that enumerated data, you can run exploit scripts that will reach into those internal databases. So like, for example, you could enumerate all the buckets, and then you could run an exploit script for a bucket, and it will say which bucket do you want to use, right? And it will list all the buckets you've enumerated. It supports storage, compute, functions, IAM, resource manager at this point in time, and they're separated into enumeration, exploit, and unauthenticated modules, and it allows you to kind of, like Pacu, you can run a script, it'll give you back the creds, and then you just become that user all within the tool. I've only got 20 minutes though, so I don't want to talk about it the whole time. I kind of want to show a demo. For the demo, I'm not going to be able to dive into the details of GCP basics for everything I cover, but the goal is hopefully I've abstracted enough of a escalation scenario that even if you don't understand GCP, you can have a general idea of what's going on. So for the video, we're going to start with the assumption that the forward CloudSec user was compromised. So we're saying like an email and password got leaked at some point, right, in a file. And then we are going to use an exploit script to generate a service account key for a service account in a separate project. And then we will pivot over to that service account in that other project. And from there, we'll just try to enumerate everything in that project to see what we can find. So let's see if this works. Okay, cool. So this is the premise, right? You're on a pen test, and there's the classic secret file.txt, and it's just got someone's, none of these creds work, but you see, the classic email and password in there. And so now we want to load those credentials into GCPwn. And so to do that, I'm just setting it up. I'm setting up a virtual environment. I'm activating the virtual environment, just grabbing the repo from, again, the NetSpy GitHub, git cloning that. And then I'm going to run a setup script. The setup script just installs the gcloud CLI. This is based off of Kali Linux. And then it's going to pip install all the necessary Python libraries. So that'll just run. And then what I'm going to do after this gets set up, if you're not familiar, ADC, application default credentials, whenever you're working with GCP, you need to run several specific command line instructions to basically open a web browser, plug in those credentials, and it will authenticate you. In the background, it writes those files to a certain location, and that's how the CLI tool works. So you can also run this from within GCPwn, but in this case, I'm just kind of doing the vanilla way of just running it from the command line. So once all our tools are installed, notice that this project we found, so we signed in as the user. Hey, this user has access to a specific GCP project. They're not in an org. Let's go ahead and set up gcloud. So I run gcloud auth login. I go ahead and set the project, which was shown on the screen in a second, and then I run auth application default. And at this point, we've installed the tool, we have our ADC credentials loaded at our command line, and now we'll be ready to start GCPwn, the actual tool. So yep, just noting here, it's not in an org, this is just a project. And so now to run GCPwn, we're just going to run main.py. Oops. Oh, it started over. Okay. We're going to run main.py. And then it's going to prompt us for a workspace. So basically, workspaces are just a logical unit in the tool. So this, you can give it whatever name you want. It's like Paku, right? It's just a label. So I'm going to call it my new workspace. It'll then give you kind of a help menu, again, like Paku. So you can see there's a lot of different commands. You can add creds, you can swap creds, you can set specific properties of creds, you can list modules, you can list projects, you can add projects. You can do a lot of stuff in here. Something else to note is, so you'll see this is pretty common. It will list all the existing creds it already knows about. In this case, we have no creds loaded, so nothing is listed there. And then you'll see you can enter creds in 4 different ways. You can do ADC. You could supply an ADC file with a refresh token. You could supply a standalone OAuth 2 token, or you could supply a service account key. In this case, we already set up ADC in the background. So all we have to do in all these cases is the keyword and credential name. Credential name, again, just a label, whatever you want to call it. It's just there for logical purposes. So we just have to put in ADC, what we want to call our creds. And they are loaded in. And now we are that user. I then run creds info. So creds info is like the who am I command in this tool. You're probably going to be running it a lot. Creds info will give you the default project name, your email, your scopes, all the projects, because it keeps a list of projects across all the users in the workspace, just a global list. It'll give you your access token if you want to plug that into another tool. It will also list the permissions and roles that credential has access to. You'll notice none are listed there because we haven't run any enumeration modules or any exploit modules. So at this point in time, it doesn't have any permissions or roles. One thing, if you know about GCP, there is a endpoint called token info, where you basically give it an access token and it will give you back your email and scopes. That's also programmed into this tool. So creds info, if you saw originally had email as none, you can just do creds token info. It will send your OAuth token to token info, get the email, return it, and load it into your profile. So that's what it just did there. And now if we run creds info again, you'll see your email and scopes are listed there. So at this point, let's see, yeah, so and then we can list all the modules. So these are all the modules. I'm not going to be able to cover all of them in 20 minutes. I will be publishing a wiki next week on that GitHub repo that walks through each of these modules and what they do and all the flags and that kind of stuff. But that's how you list all the modules. And then if you want to run a module, you do modules run, the module name, and then whatever the flags are. So in this case, I think I do -O. You can list all the projects with projects as well. And then if you want to run a module, I did modules run enum-all-h, gives me the help menu. Then I'm going to run enum-all. So every service in GCP has like an enumeration script, or one or several enumeration scripts, and that would take way too long to run all individually. So I just made one module called enum-all that will run all of the enumeration scripts at once. And it basically tries to enumerate all the projects, orgs, and folders. Then it tries to enumerate all the resources, and then it tries to pull all the policy bindings at the end. So you go ahead and run that, and then we'll see that once we run this, our user there's not a lot of resources in this account. So the one thing it found was the project name, right, which we kind of already knew. Notice now that we run creds info, we have a permission listed there, get IAM policy. That's because in the background, the module worked. It called get IAM policy. It got a response, and then it just logged it, or I guess added it to that user. So as you're running the enumeration modules, that is what will happen. Another point here, a lot of the enumeration modules have a flag, which we'll see shortly, called --IAM. If you're not familiar, there's an API in GCP called test IAM permissions for a lot of different resources, where you can give it a huge list of permissions, and it will return the permissions you are allowed to call. You don't actually need to be authorized to call that API, so you can just call it on most of the enumeration modules. So what I'm going to run here in a second is enum resources, which rather than enum-all, which runs all the enumeration scripts, enum resources just enumerates projects, folders, and orgs. And then I'm going to give it the --IAM flag to call test IAM permissions in the background when it does that enumeration. And what we'll see here is once I run that, So it calls test IAM permissions in the background. If I do creds info again, notice I have all these permissions now. So now I know what all the permissions are. I highlight the dangerous ones red. And so that will give you all the permissions. And so, yeah, all the enumeration modules, you can usually add --IAM. And so at this point, we've kind of gone through this one private account. There haven't been that many resources. We got all our permissions. And so now we want to pivot into that other project, like I was saying at the beginning where that service account is. So we kind of have the clues from the secret file.txt. There's the service account name there, and that includes the project ID. So now the question you might be asking is, how do I add a project to GCPwn if I want to enumerate it, right? If it's not picked up by auto-detected methods. So in GCPwn, you can manually add projects with just projects add, and then you can run the modules and you can say run it on all the projects or specific projects, and it will just basically plug in that project name for all the calls. So actually I think that'll be showed here in a second, but I'm trying to remember what this call is. Oh, okay. So actually I just run an exploit call. So we're just gonna assume that we have the service account name. We'll make the logical leap of let's just try generating service key for it. And so we run an exploit script there. So it's modules run the exploit script name, and then the SA account. And so a lot of the times when you pass in resource names for all these modules, it's usually project / the project name / locations or zones if applicable, the location or zone / service account or whatever the resource is and the name of that resource. So in this case, I did the project and the resource, the service account name, and then I did -- create, and you'll see it returned, hey, I successfully created the key. Do you want to try assuming the new credentials? And you say yes. And you will become the new credentials in the new project. One thing to note, I think this might actually be a bug I still have to fix, but the project name won't change. So you have to manually add the project, like I was saying before, which you can do, which should be shown here in a second. It'll just do, yep, project set. So you can do projects add, project set, and just add them to your global list of projects, and that will just get plugged into all the tools. Okay, so now we have this new service account and this new project, so we want to enumerate everything, right? So we're going to run enum all again. Notice the creds info for that service account has nothing because we haven't enumerated anything yet. We run enum all, and something that's interesting is when we run enumeration all, you'll notice in this new project we actually got some buckets back. So when it enumerated the buckets, it enumerated some buckets and blobs. You'll also notice creds info is now filled out. That's really hard to read. A lot of the output I have in here, you can add a -- CSV flag, and it will write it all to a nice CSV file that you can just go through. All the data that is downloaded or generated gets put in the gathered data folder that is made at the root of GCPwn. And so I just cat the file there. You saw it briefly, the CSV. I don't have time to go into the Excel document in that, but it'll generate the CSV file. Now we're going to run enum buckets -- download. So another note, a lot of the enumeration modules, like how I said they have a -- IAM for test IAM permissions, a lot of them also have a -- download, which will, for buckets, it'll download all the blobs. For functions, it'll download all the source code. And for compute, it will take screenshots and download all the serial. And so in this case, we're just running the specific enumerate buckets module. Notice it prompts, do you want to try all projects or a certain project? We say just this project, and you'll see after I do that the file has been downloaded to gather data under the bucket name. There's also filters, which I don't show here, so if you don't want to download every file, but you want to download every file that ends in .text, right, or whatever, you can specify a load of filters on the download part. And so we have this bucket, we cat the files. Oh, it's another service account key, right? And then there's a note here that I'm not going to read fully, but it basically gives you 2 more project names. Okay, and so at this point, we have our MyDev service account, and we have the service account key for deployer service account, right, all within the same project. So now we're going to add that service account key, because in GCPwn, we have 2 credentials right now, right? We have our original OAuth credentials and the service account that we generated the service account keys for. So I'm going to show here how you can add a service account key from within the tool. And I think this one's, shorter. So just showing that, looking at this note, we find 2 more project names. And this is also showing, let's say we stop the project, we cancel the project and we come back to it a couple hours later. If you start up the tool, you'll see your workspaces there. And you'll see right here, it actually lists the credentials that we were using last time. And so if you don't have to re-enter the credentials every time, it stores them. So we chose the OAuth user, so number 1 there. And OAuth credentials, the tool will also detect if they're expired and auto-refresh them for you, so you don't have to keep refreshing them if that's possible. So if you look at the output there, it might be hard to read, but it says expired creds. I went ahead and refreshed them. If you want to list all the creds in the workspace, it's just creds. And then if you want to swap creds, it's cred swap, or the name of the creds, and you can basically swap between them. And then, so what I'll be showing here is how to actually add the credentials from within the tool. So again, you could just start up the tool and add them through that startup prompt, or you could add them at the command line here. So it's just creds add, the name of the credential, the type, and the service file. And you just add that, and it will add those credentials, and then you can just swap to those credentials, and you'll basically be that user. So, yep, added it. If I list creds again, now we see our new cred is listed there, and we can do cred swap to the new credential. Or yeah, you can just put in the name too. Yep, and so that's it. So now we have our new credentials loaded into the tool. There it goes. Okay, so now the next thing is we got those 2 additional project names from the note file. So as you might have guessed, we're going to do usually enumerate all again, right, and just keep enumerating. We know there's 2 projects. We're going to assume that this service account can probably reach into there. In this case, I'm going to do an enum service accounts, which is specifically enumerating service accounts. Then I'm going to do enumerate policy bindings, which is going to grab all the policy bindings for the service accounts. And there's something in, I think it's the next slide. Yeah, there's something in GCP called implicit delegation, which basically says deployer service account has the implicit delegation permission on role just for testing, and the role just for testing has the get access token permission on production role. So through implicit delegation, I'm just going to get the access token from the original user here. And so normally you might have to parse all the IAM bindings to find this. What my tool does is it will enumerate the service accounts, grab the policy bindings for all the service accounts, and then it will use some logic to generate all the paths that you can take. And then it will list out all the impersonation paths for you that end in generating an access token, and then you can just choose one of those to generate an access token. So in this case, we're going to add the projects manually. Yeah, so just highlighting those are the 2 projects. And we're going to go ahead and add those manually to our tool. Yep. So those are our projects right now, right? So if we run the enumeration modules, they won't enumerate the new projects because we haven't added them. So I just add them there. There's one. Yep, and there's the other one. Yep, just showing that they've been added. Creds info, yep. So again, our user doesn't have any permissions listed, right? It's brand new, no permissions or roles listed there. I run enum service accounts. I'm going to say, yep, run it on all the projects. It goes through, it finds all these different service accounts. And yep, the test bench is the one from that note, along with production project. So another module I have is called process IAM bindings, where it will take all the IAM bindings you've enumerated thus far, and it will print them out in an easy-to-read format, condensed to a single member, which I think is what will be run next here. So I run --IAM, because again, you can do that for test IAM permissions. So now I run --IAM for test IAM permissions. I do creds info again, and I have way more permissions, because I just hit all the test IAM permissions endpoints for all the service accounts. And you'll see implicit delegation, right, which is what I was kind of hinting at earlier. And then I enumerate all the policy bindings, so I grab all of those for the service accounts. And now I think I run process IAM bindings. Yep, so you'll notice process IAM bindings takes all the IAM bindings and it gives you a nice summary for every user that's like easy to read. It handles direct roles and inherited roles. And so if we kind of look at the output here, I'm not going to pause it because we're kind of short on time, but you can see that the deployer service account has the service account token creator permission on role just for testing. And role just for testing has a service account creator role on production functions role, so you can kind of make the leap for the implicit delegation there. Yep, and then okay, yeah, I'm grabbing the command. Analyze vulns is something else I don't have time to show, but it'll also go through all the IAM bindings and flag vulnerable roles and permissions, both groups. It handles direct roles, custom roles, and convenience roles. So that's just something I'm showing here. Should be the last command. Yeah, so I run exploit generate access token, which normally generates just an access token for a service account, but I pass in the flag -- all delegation. And if you look on the screen, it might be hard to see, but basically the first 3 options are paths to get to generating an access token. And so you don't have to manually grab all those service accounts and put them in. You just put in the number of the one you want, with the caveat that you need permissions for that first node in the path. So in this case, I do 1, it says, yep, it worked, here's your token, do you want to become the new user? You say yes, and now you're the new user. Yep, and that's it, and creds info. This is another, whoops. Okay, and then that was the last video. I have another video here I'm not going to show because I'm out of time, but it would basically create, a cloud function. See if I can get this. There it goes. Okay, so you know what now? Just quick summary. Those are kind of the modules I'm thinking of adding next. Basically, next week I'm going to be publishing a wiki that goes through every module, so you have a good idea of what all the flags are and what you can do. And then just basically watch the GitHub repo for updates. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Scott. I think we may have time for one question for Scott. That would be great.
Thank you for spending, I'm sure, considerable time building this out. It was really, really valuable. It just piqued my curiosity on the Get Access Token module. Does that module also look for other ways of impersonation, like Get OpenID token or the signed JOT method?
Not the moment, but it does give you other paths of impersonation that don't end in generating an access token.
Oh.
So I think it gives you paths that are just impersonate, but yeah, I could probably add a check to be impersonate to anything other than get access token.
Okay,
so,
cool,
yeah.
Thanks.
You have anything for Azure coming out soon?
What was that?
Azure? How about Azure?
No thanks.
Just for a question. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. Lunch will be downstairs. It's sponsored, or actually, it's based on our sponsors. Please go in the lobby area, grab some lunch. We'll see you back at 1 o'clock.